From Monterey County all the way up into central San Luis Obispo County is the San Lucia mountain range. A large expanse of peaks and wilderness that's imposing enough to have posed a hurdle to early Spanish explorers making their way to the California coast. It is a place of wonder, natural beauty, and history, and it has also long been said to be the haunt of shadow beings that seem to stand and observe our world from afar. What have become known as the Dark Watchers are typically said to be very tall humanoid entities ranging in height from 7 feet tall all the way up to around 15 feet tall, dressed in all black and wearing flowing cloaks and wide-brimmed hats, with many sightings also mentioning some sort of staves or sticks in the being's hands. Facial features are not typically seen, and they are almost always silent, enigmatic figures usually seen at a distance up on ridges, silhouetted against the darkening twilight sky, always at around dusk or dawn, quietly looking over and surveying their domain with unknowable purpose, and often vanishing in the blink of an eye, especially if you were to try and draw closer. Such strange entities have been reported for centuries, with the accounts supposedly traced back to at least the native Chumash tribe, off the central coast of California and the Channel Islands, who apparently had a rich tradition of lore on these enigmatic beings and called them the Old Ones. Early Spanish explorers and Mexican ranchers also knew of them, referring to them as Los Vigilantes Oscuros, and they were often seen by early explorers and soldiers in the region, who described the unsettling experience of being observed by them from cliffs high above. These beings have been sighted ever since, going on to be mentioned in countless literary references and sighting reports. One very well-known literary mention of the mysterious beings was written of in John Steinbeck's 1938 book, The Long Valley, in which the creatures were written of in a short story called Flight, particularly in one passage that reads, "Pepe looked up to the top of the next dry, withered ridge. He saw a dark form against the sky, a man's figure standing on top of a rock, and he glanced away quickly, not to appear curious. When a moment later he looked up again, the figure was gone. Pepe looked suspiciously back every minute or so, and his eyes sought the tops of the ridges ahead. Once, on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor where they lived, but it was better to ignore them and never to show interest in them. They did not bother one who stayed on the trail and minded his own business." This is undeniably based on the pervasive lore of these entities, and other writers at around the same time made mention of the Dark Watchers, including notable poet Robinson Jeffers, in his poem Such Counsels You Gave to Me and Other Poems, in which he calls them forms that look human but certainly are not human, and says of them, "He thought it might be one of the Watchers, who are often seen in this length of coast range, forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human. They come from behind ridges to watch, but when he approached it, he recognized the shabby clothes and pale hair, and even the averted forehead and concave line from the eye to the jaw, so that he was not surprised when the figure turning towards him in the quiet twilight showed his own face. Then it melted and merged into the shadows beyond it." These literary accounts draw from the same local traditions, which have gone back centuries and continue on to this day. In the mid-1960s, there was an alleged sighting of the Dark Watchers made by a high school teacher who was out hiking in the range at the Monterey Peninsula. As he walked along, he claimed that he had seen a tall, dark figure looming up upon a ridge, which seemed to be in the process of merely standing and contemplating the scenery. The hiker called out the mysterious figure, and at that instant, the entity simply dissolved from sight as if it had never been there at all. There have been numerous supposed sightings of these strange entities since, right up until very recent years. In 2013, there was a report made by an Elizabeth Benitez of San Mateo, California, who claimed to have seen the specters in broad daylight near the San Luis Obispo Reservoir. She would say of this encounter, "I remember one day my friend and I were coming back from Los Angeles. We passed the San Luis Obispo Reservoir, and as we drove on the road, I saw something at a distance down at the end of the mountain. It was a really big human figure, but it wasn't. It had a black cape kind of, like the Grim Reaper, and it was leaning over, holding onto a staff at a puddle of water, or so that is what it seemed at a distance. It was in daytime too, so I could identify it. It wasn't a person. Even in midlight, he was very black and reminded me of a raven. I told my friend that I was driving to look over at the mountains, and surprisingly, she was able to see a glimpse of it. I asked her what she saw, without giving her my details, and she said exactly what I saw. She only looked at it for about 5 seconds, but she was able to see it. She almost lost control of the car too when she looked away at it, and I begged her to go back and see it, but she was very tired of driving already. These dark watchers are real. In 2015, there was a report from a long-distance runner calling himself Joey in Sylmar, California. The witness said that he had been out training for a race in the mountains when he saw something peculiar, saying of his experience, "Time of day was 2 p.m. and I was running up in an area where no human could climb without gear. I saw a black figure in plain daylight. I've never seen anything like it up in the mountain. Was darker than dark. Could not explain it. A year passed, and today again, January 24th, I saw it again, and in the same spot." There have been many other reports as well. As recently as 2018, there was a report from a witness from Ojai, California, who was out hiking in the mountains when he came across something very bizarre indeed. He would say, "I was hiking up a remote trail up the 33 in Ojai. I was about an hour up into the mountain. No people, no cars in sight. As I was hiking, I had this eerie feeling I was being watched. I looked up at the top of the mountain. It was a black figure. I waved, jokingly, not really thinking the object was a person. It waved back. Thinking I was maybe tripping, or that it was a tree waving in the wind, I took a puff of my cigarette, only to see the figure blow out a plume of smoke as well. I started seeing it flowing, and I say flowing, almost floating vertically. I ran like hell back to my car, spraining my knee in the process." There are numerous other accounts of seeing these inexplicable shadow beings out in the wilderness silently surveying the land, to the point that, rather interestingly, John Steinbeck's own son, Thomas Steinbeck, wrote an entire book on the subject after having his own encounter. He would go on to research the lore of the Dark Watchers and pen the book In Search of the Dark Watchers, along with co-author Benjamin Brode, who goes into quite a lot of depth into the phenomenon and its cultural origins. Some have pointed out to this being a trick of light or illusion, but that somehow seems to be an inadequate explanation for the entirety of this phenomenon. It seems like this is a phenomenon for which there are no clear answers, and those enigmatic tall beings dressed in dark upon the cliffs and ridges of these mountains at twilight remain a baffling mystery. Are these just illusions or hallucinations? If so, why should they be confined to this one mountain range? There is also the idea that this may be due to the presence of infrasound signals in the area, which can be caused by natural processes such as the wind along the rocks, and can have strange effects on the human psyche. But again, why would the Dark Watchers legend take root here of all places if that's the case? And why would the reports be so consistent in the appearance and behavior of the entities? Maybe this is something else. Are these some sort of supernatural or even interdimensional entities here on some unknown mission? It's impossible to tell, and the Dark Watchers of California remain a mystery that really captures the imagination. If you like what you heard, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe and ring the little bell notification thingy so that way you'll know when the next video from Unknown Territory comes out. And don't forget to come back on Monday for another episode of The Unknown Files here on Unknown Territory.